These are all the A series devices from this year and also some of the devices from last year. We saw a number of changes that Samsung made with the A series this year, changes that I'm not sure are disappointing or genius. Nevertheless, I'm here to make it simple. I'll give you the best 2 picks from this lineup, and in the situation you need to buy one of these smartphones. And so without taking much of your time, yo guys, let's get started. Starting with the Samsung Galaxy A03. This is the entry-level smartphone from the 2020 A series. If you watched last year's A series comparison, you would know that I was disappointed with the A02. It had basically little to no value for the money. Well, this A03 is supposedly an upgrade to the A02, considering how much of a mess the A02 was. For $100 or 67,000 naira, you can get the base memory configuration of 3 gigs of RAM and 32 gigs of internal storage. Although you can bump that configuration to 4 gigs, 64 gigs for an extra 10,000 naira or $15. Unisoc T606 chipset, a 12nm processor that is quite capable is what you get from the smartphone, giving you benchmark scores higher than the Exynos 850, and that comes in the Samsung Galaxy A13 here, which I'll talk on a little bit later. This doesn't mean you get an amazing gaming performance. The GPU, the Mali G57, bottles the graphic performance on the A03. Aside from processing and the standard 5000 mAh battery, for the price, nothing else does stand out. You have a 6.5-inch 720p TFT display with an Infinity V styled notch. The basic system has refresh rate, there's no screen protection, and most annoyingly, there's no fingerprint scanner on the Samsung Galaxy A03. You have dual camera configuration, a 48-megapixel main sensor and a 2-megapixel depth sensor, plus the standard 5-megapixel selfie camera. Quite decent, I must say, and the videos can max out in terms of recording at 1080p Full HD with no stabilizations. It is a little bit hard recommending the Samsung Galaxy A03 since you could get better deals out there. Now let's move over to the Samsung Galaxy A13 on here. Spoiler, I also find it a little bit hard to recommend this device, and here's why. For $150, which is 102,000 naira, you get the 4 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of internal storage for the Galaxy A13, of which you can double the internal storage for an extra 20,000 naira, and you get that one at 113,000 naira. It feels better than the Samsung Galaxy A03 obviously, but again, the introduction of the Samsung Galaxy A23 makes this one not worth that money. Of course, as a marketing strategy, the Samsung Galaxy A13 has a lot of things that were lacking from the Samsung Galaxy A03. You know, Gorilla Glass 5 protection, there's also a fast power button mounted fingerprint scanner, more resolution in terms of the display, a Full HD panel, and you also get a 25 watts charging support for the 5000 mAh battery you get from that smartphone. Although a 15-watt fast charger is what you get from within the box of the A13. A lot of things remain the same as with this other device, starting with the 6.6-inch TFT LCD panel you get from the Samsung Galaxy A13. Performance is maintained by the Exynos 850 chipset, an 8nm chipset, but this actually isn't the fastest there is. In fact, this is slow. Basic mobile computing tasks can be managed efficiently on the smartphone, but those heavy titles can't really fly with the Samsung Galaxy A13. The cameras are quite decent, like really decent that they are impressive for the price. You have 50 megapixel, 5 megapixels and a 2 megapixel lens for the triple camera setup at the rear and an 8 megapixel selfie camera on this device. Daily shots with the rear cameras retain good amount of details without bearing the photographs and noise and other blemishes. This is a step in the right direction when compared to the Samsung Galaxy A03. Still Full HD in terms of the video you record here with no stabilization. The major reason why I don't still recommend the Samsung Galaxy A13 this year is because you get a better value for money when you move over to the Samsung Galaxy A23 for about $20 more. Now let's talk about the Samsung Galaxy A23. If you must get a Samsung Galaxy budget smartphone right now for $200, which is 125,000 naira, then the Galaxy A23 is what I would recommend. For that price, you get 4 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of internal storage. Remember, we're comparing it to other devices in this series, and not compared to other alternatives out there like the Redmi Note 11, for example. You'd realize that Samsung isn't doing that much this year. Now, bigger than the A33 and A53, the Galaxy A23 is a 6.6-inch with a dewdrop styled notch TFT display, not AMOLED. I know, but that shouldn't get you disappointed. The display on here is not bad at all. It refreshes at 90 Hz and has this Gorilla Glass 5 protection. This is a really good performance sporting the Snapdragon 680 processor, and although it might not be the best gaming smartphone, which is obvious looking at the price at which you get this device, it offers a seamless and enjoyable gaming experience. On the cameras here, you get a 50 megapixel main lens, 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensor, and a 2 megapixel macro lens. While the front camera gives you an 8 megapixel wide sensor. You get better dynamic range, better exposure handling, better contrast ratio, and most times a little less saturation in the photos, but makes up for that with the details you get from this camera. You should expect a max resolution of 1080p for the videos recording using the Samsung Galaxy A23, which is similar to what you get from the Samsung Galaxy A13. Now the battery and charging capacity are similar to the A13, 5000 mAh battery, 25 watt fast charging support with a 15 watt charger out of the box. Did I mention that it also retains the headphone jack, and this is definitely a solid one. Now although the Samsung Galaxy A33 falls within the mid-range of the A series, the A33 can easily be referred to as the better value for money than the A53. It retails at $370 or 205,000 naira for a device with a 6.4-inch Super AMOLED Infinity U display, 1080p Full HD Plus resolution, and a 90Hz refresh rate. The display is clearly a step up from the A23, except for the smaller screen. Now, from the Samsung Galaxy A33 upwards, you get an IP67 water resistance rating, but you miss out on the headphone jack on these devices, and also you do not get chargers from within the boxes for these devices. For the memory configuration, that's the base configuration starts at 4 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of internal storage, up to 8 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of memory. Powered by the Exynos 1280 processor and running on Android 12 and One UI 4.1, you also get memory expansion on the A33. On the camera side of things, 48 megapixel main sensor, 8 megapixel ultra wide, 5 megapixel macro lens, and a 2 megapixel depth sensor make up the quad camera setup at the back, while a 30 megapixel sits in front of the smartphone. Pictures captured with both the rear and the front facing cameras have good details, great dynamic range, so it turns out really nice. And also videos can be recorded at 4K with no image stabilization, and you get 5000 mAh battery with 25 watts fast charging support. This here, the Samsung Galaxy A33, is the next device I do recommend from this lineup, and you would find out why as we proceed. The Galaxy A53. This isn't a huge leap from the predecessor, the A52. A lot of things are really similar with this other device here, except for the slightly refined design on this device and the bigger 5000 mAh battery here, but this will be countered by the 120Hz refresh rate on the A53. Speaking of which, you get a 6.2-inch AMOLED display, a 1080p Full HD Plus resolution display. In terms of display quality, I think it's about the same as the A33 in this lineup, except for the higher refresh rate on here and this punch hole notch you get from this device. The Galaxy A53 is powered by the Exynos 1280 processor and runs on Android 12 with One UI 4.1, just like the A33 also. Game handling is quite good, with the 6 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of internal storage, which is obviously expandable via a micro SD card slot. Where you'd see a big difference between the A53 and the A33 is in terms of the cameras. The A53 sports a 64 megapixel f1.8 with optical image stabilization lens here, a 12 megapixel ultra wide, 5 megapixel depth sensor, and a 5 megapixel macro lens, while the selfie camera here is a 32 megapixel sensor. Very impressive camera specs. There's even an AI zoom, but the A73 has an even more impressive camera set, which we'll talk about later. Shots from the primary camera, the ultra wide and the selfie cameras are really clear, contrasty and colorful in excellently lit conditions. But then for the base price of 251,000 naira or $450, I can't recommend the A53 over the A33 on here, which is 45,000 naira less in price, about $80 less. I mean, there are a lot of things you can't ignore with that device. Processing is about the same, actually the same processor. Displays are about the same. You get the same visual experience. There isn't that much difference between the 90Hz and 120Hz refresh rates here in terms of people looking at these devices. And the A33 has a larger display. I don't think the A53 is worth the extra bucks for me. Now, the Samsung Galaxy A73 is the last we're going to talk about in this lineup. And for $100 more than the Samsung Galaxy A53, retailing at $550, about 310,000 naira right now, this hits almost every need in mid-range devices. If we ignore the high cost, lack of charger, and the headphones, and of course other alternatives out there like the Redmi Note 11 Pro Plus 5G, this is a really good smartphone. In fact, it is the best in the A series, and that's for sure. The singular reason why the Samsung Galaxy A73 is the best of the A series is because of the processor on here. It supports the powerful Snapdragon 778G CPU, and it performs excellently well in all genres, both basic and heavy gaming. As for the display, the Samsung Galaxy A73 has the largest screen size here. a 6.7-inch Full HD Plus Super AMOLED Infinity O display with a 120Hz refresh rate. This display is really bright outdoors and runs on One UI 4.1 as far as the skin on here, which is based off Android 12. For the memory configurations, you get a base config of 6 gigs and 128 gigs RAM-ROM, up to 8 256. Another major feature that sets the A73 apart from the rest in this lineup is the camera setup. It adorns an amazing 108 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide, a 5 megapixel macro lens, and 5 megapixel depth camera. For the selfie camera here, you get a 32 megapixel shooter, and the picture quality is excellent for this series. Video is capped at 4K for both the front and the rear cameras, and this is the best smartphone from this lineup, but you have to consider that price point. So there are just two smartphones I strongly recommend in this lineup. Now let me get something out of the way. If you want the best of the best and money ain't a problem for you, then go with the Samsung Galaxy A73 on here. It's just the best Galaxy A series smartphone there is right now, no doubt. But now let's talk about the other four devices on here, this ones and this. If you're thinking of purchasing a new smartphone right now, and from that budget lineup like the A03, 13 and 23, you shouldn't look at the A03, and for that extra $20, you should get the A23 over the Samsung Galaxy A13. Now for the mid-range category, I would recommend the A33 over the A53. Updates are definitely the same and on point, and the only major difference between those two smartphones would be the slightly detailed camera, and that's it. If you want the A33, here's a video I made on that device. Call it that day.